The crisis in Syria this week has exposed divisions into the international community about how to resolve that problem, with acute divisions in the UN Security Council and wider about a measure that would either require President Bashar al-Assad to step down or undertake significant reforms. Russia and China have been at odds with most of the international community and have been vigorously criticized as a result. I'm going to, in discussion with Sarah, explore the reasons for China and Russia taking the stance they have towards the Syrian problem and try and understand a little bit about what it says about their domestic regimes and the consequences that may ensue from the stances that they've taken. Well, Sarah, we might as well begin, I think, with a visit of the Russian foreign minister yesterday to Damascus. What is Russia's bottom line as far as this issue is concerned?
Well, the reason that the Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, went to Syria was twofold. First, to look at the situation on the ground and to see just how bad things were for Assad. But second, and most importantly, it was a signal of support. Despite what you said about the extraordinary criticism that Russia has incurred, which is absolutely correct, Russia has doubled down on its support for the Assad regime and wants that to be known not just on the UNSC, but to the entire international community.
And to its domestic population.
Oh, absolutely, because the reason Russia has been so intransigently supportive of the Assad regime is partly economic. I mean, Syria is one of the largest purchasers of Russian arms exports, Russian energy companies are active there, and so forth. But the other dimension to this is strategic and perceptual. Russia is really concerned about the demonstration effects that the fall of Assad would have for its own populace. Now, I'll tell you, most Russians, frankly, are not particularly concerned with what's going on in Syria, but the foreign policy establishment perceives a very real risk that the fall of yet another domino, as they see it, would further loosen Putin's grip on power, which is starting to look a bit tenuous, as we know.
That's right, and I think similar calculations must be at work in the minds of many in Beijing, presiding as they do over a vast country, prey to all sorts of disputes and discontents. Nothing very surprising about that, but very sensitive. And if there is a sense that in the international community there's the capacity and the willingness to somehow maneuver international bodies into a position of saying there ought to be reform, there ought to be political change, then that's a matter of great moment. And that, rather as in the Russian case you've just outlined, I think plays into the domestic position in Beijing. You don't have to believe, however, as some US diplomats have said, that Russia is on the wrong side of history on this, to observe that Russia could be discomforted if, or rather when, the regime does fall in Damascus.
Well, absolutely, and this is something I'd like to ask you about as well on the Chinese side, because for Russia, Syria is such a critical ally in the Middle East. It doesn't have many cards to play if Assad falls. Iran has not been a particularly reliable ally, and unlike China, Russia's strategic interests in the Middle East are not particularly diversified.
So what does Russia value more, friends in Damascus or enemies, or at least, let's say, lukewarm associates in the other Arab capitals?
Well, lukewarm associates is certainly the right phrase to use here, but the answer to your question really depends on timing. The Russian presidential election is on the 4th of March. It'll take them a few weeks, perhaps a couple of months after that, to form a government, but the bottom line is that until that government is in place, until the domestic political situation has quieted down, this fortress Russia mentality is going to dominate foreign policy making, especially on Syria.
And that might be a difference with China insofar as it has assets, interests, operations throughout the Middle East. Yes. And to the degree that it's exposed to discontent about developments in Syria from those quarters, I could see its position changing and when push comes to shove, giving up this principled stand that it's supposed to be taking in the interests of protecting those wider assets. Russia is not in that position.
Indeed.
Sarah, thanks very much. Do watch out for our continued analysis of the crisis in Syria and its international ramifications.